You're listening to At the Core with Sarah Friend, in which I have conversations with women in leadership. As the president of a firm, I'm honored to be a leader and have this platform to connect with other women in leadership, to talk with them, hear their stories, and celebrate their unique journeys and impact. This episode, our guest is Keyne Petkovic, an executive leadership coach contracted with Assured Strategies. Keyne has 20 years of executive management experience and played an active leadership role in company financial and business process improvement initiatives. She specializes in middle management and executive level leadership training, coaching, and workshop facilitation. As an operations executive, she has excelled in developing and leading business process improvement teams while building strong cross-functional team dynamics through personal, hands-on investment in staff growth and development. Her ability to combine leadership, management, and emotional intelligence skills in the workplace environment is unparalleled. Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. We've known each other for a while now, so it's a really great opportunity to flip the script. Instead of me teaching and being a part on that side, I get to be a part on the interview side.
I love it. Well, we have worked together for a long time, and not just you and me, but you have worked with our entire people leadership team. So there's 42 of us. And the more people we introduce you to, it seems like the more people we decide need to know you. So I hope you take that as a compliment. I want to start by telling you a little story that you might not have heard before. And this goes back to before we were working with Assured Strategies. There are several of us on our executive leadership team who are a part of Vistage. And Vistage is, as you know, a coaching platform where leaders from different businesses get together. And every month we spend a day together learning from each other, sharing best practices, and having speakers come in from all over the country. And one month in walks David Chavez from Assured Strategies, your company. And we were so impressed by the services of Assured Strategies. And we were just at this really interesting point for the partners group around where we were for our business strategy and succession planning. You know, this was 6-7 years ago. And we knew that we would benefit from outside strategic thinking to get us out of our own way and really help us get out of the urgency of working in the business, right? And have somebody help us really think more globally about where we were going over the next 10 years as a business. And so we met as an executive leadership team, and the three of us who heard David's presentation talked to the rest of our executive leadership team and said, listen, we think that this is a great idea. Let's bring in some outside help to really take us to the next level as an organization. And you wouldn't expect it, but it was our CFO, Jake Schaefer, who said, hey, if we can get the kind of results that David is selling, I'd pay $1 million for that service. We have absolutely gotten every bit of value out of our partnership. And you weren't initially a part of, our statement of work, our scope of work with Assured Strategies. But gosh, as soon as we started working with Assured Strategies, we knew pretty early on that we wanted to expand the scope of our leadership team who got the benefit of learning from Assured Strategies team. And David astutely said, hey, I don't think I'm the right person for the rest of your leadership team, but boy, do I have a person for you. And that's how we met you. And our team just absolutely loves working with you. And I just appreciate the journey that you've been on with us to really help us level up as an organization.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think we started leadership training in 2000. And so that's when I started to officially work with you all. And yeah, it's been such a journey over the years of our relationship. I've received just as much than I hope that I've been able to give. So I think the relationship at this point has become quite invested and personal.
maybe where we should start, you had such an interesting childhood and upbringing. Do you mind going way back in the archives and kind of talking about how you grew up? I'd just love to hear where you think your leadership aspirations came from, but would just love to hear more about the early years of Keyne.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And if it's okay, I think I'm going to wrap into the story parts of those leadership pieces, because one of the things we always do in leadership training is ask people, where did you first feel that you were a leader? It's not always a title, right? Yeah. And so I think that the question you're asking for me, it does wrap into my story. So I think I'm going to try to do that if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
So I was born in California, and I'm one of 6 children. I'm the second oldest of 6. And my parents, moved us as a family pretty much every year. By the time I graduated high school, I had lived in over 20 homes. Being born in California, and then my family pretty early on, we moved out to Taiwan for 2 years because at the time, my dad was working for Taipei University as a professor. He has a PhD in Asian studies, specifically Taiwan, Chinese, American affairs. And so after 2 years, then we moved back and we went to the East Coast. So the way I emotionally feel about where I was raised when people ask me is on the East Coast. We lived in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. And then after my parents divorced, when I was in high school, senior in high school, my mom and the rest of the kids, they moved down to Florida and then Montana and then Minnesota. So I think that for me, being the second oldest of 6 kids, with all of that moving, we became a super, super tight knit family where my siblings were my best friends, and they were the only people who I knew when we, moved to a new location. And in those days, as we all know, we didn't have cell phones. It was long distance phone calls. And, it was a big deal just even to have a recording where someone called and left you a message when you were out of the house and you came rushing home to hear if you had any messages on your recorder. I mean, it was that time frame. So the ability to keep in contact with past friends in those different locations really wasn't there for me as a kid with, long distance phone calls. So really my siblings were my peeps. And then the other thing that I did was play soccer. So I was an avid soccer player. I even had a chance to play in Germany when I was in high school. We had an all-star team in Pennsylvania where I went to high school and then stayed on at Penn State for college. And we got to go overseas and play against some German teams. So soccer was a big, big part of my life. And I always tell folks that when you are a center fullback, you're commanding the field. So you're pushing everyone up, you're pulling them back, you're talking to the goalie, you're directing which side of the field you're going to go on. And so I think that for me personally, a lot of just having to step up and having to do what was necessary to take care of either the family or my soccer team. I just think it just was a part of my personality.
That must have been pretty hard though, moving every year.
Yes, it definitely was. And it's definitely a part of my psychology now. I think that, and we'll maybe get into some of this from the leadership journey as a female executive. It's very easy for me to put on a good face and be sociable and meet people very easily and quickly, because I knew that if I didn't put out the effort first, those friendships weren't going to happen. And because every year was a new school with a new group of people, and I was the new one, feeling so insecure and so anxious about, who I was going to meet and everything. I think soccer gave me an immediate peer group. And knowing that I had to be the one to be sociable and put myself out there to make friends, I couldn't rely on other people to sort of come to me. I do believe that had a large impact upon how I grew up from a social perspective.
Absolutely. Well, and I see those, knowing you now, right? You do have that ability to jump right in, to make, fast connections with people. So it's really interesting, right? That when we think about how do we develop those skills over time, that for you, knowing even as a teenager without like the life context, right? Just saying, hey, it's up to me to make this happen. Right. Yeah. Which is such a great lesson for us to carry with us throughout adulthood, because that never changes, right? It's always up to us to make things happen. It sounds like you had a big life change right as you were graduating from high school. Your parents divorced. You're the second oldest of 6. And this is the time when you're typically heading off to your post-high school life. So what did that look like for you?
After they divorced, my mom moved away because she's also a professor of early childhood education. She got her doctorate at Penn State. So she left and went down to a university in Florida with the smaller kids. And so I think that was like really the first time that I didn't have siblings to necessarily, take care of. I was always the mini mom, especially while she was getting her doctorate. And, I was the one that needed to get them up in the morning and get them ready for school and get them, home after school. At that point I was driving, right. And then, make dinner and get them to bed, because she was obviously trying to get the education she needed to support the family, So I think during that time, it was probably hard to be separated and not be the mini mom, so to speak. So me and my siblings have really, really, really deep, close relationships. As adults, they're my primary support. I went to Penn State myself because I was so tired of moving every year that I just wanted to stay. And at State College, Pennsylvania, where I went to high school, everyone else was graduating and wanting to go away and leave town. And that was the town they had grown up in, and they couldn't wait to go to schools, outside of the area. For me, I was just craving a home base that I only applied to Penn State. It's the only place I wanted to go. I didn't want to move. And so I ended up, staying there for my college education, which I really enjoyed those years a lot. And when I was listening to your story, Sarah, you had shared that at first you had wanted to maybe become a teacher, right? Like the university that you went to was primarily focused on teaching. And that was actually my first choice going into college. Was I thought, I'm going to go into the education program. And like you, after a year, I decided it really wasn't my true calling. And I think I had gone in that direction because my mom was a professor and my aunt, was a teacher and my dad was a professor. And like there was so much education in my family that for me, it seemed very natural. And
it's the one career with a mom as a professor, your dad in academia, right? Like you see it, you know exactly what to expect, right? And so there's comfort in that. And so I do think it's so interesting that for many of us is kind of that first go-to instinct, right? But then, so you went to Penn State, you think you're going to go into education. At what point did that shift for you?
Well, I ended up going into psychology, and then I did a double major in business. Because my dad at the time, he kept saying to me, Keyne, you really should focus on business. You're like, you just think like an entrepreneur. That's just natural for you. But I was so sure of myself, and I didn't want anything to do with like being in a business major, right? I discarded my father's thoughts about what I should be doing. I want to be Miss Independent, So I wanted to do psychology, but I thought, okay, I'll just do a second degree here in business. And sure enough, ironically, through my career, I ended up focusing in business. So, but I just find that parents or those that know you really well, sometimes they do have words of wisdom that we don't always listen to.
No, ain't that the truth? I mean, we both have teenagers, so we know that from both sides, right?
Yeah. And then the funny part about, going into then graduate school to become a counselor. Originally, I wanted to go and become an FBI agent.
What?
And so, yes, I wanted to become an FBI agent because I loved secrets. Like I loved knowing the inside scoop of things or trying to figure things out or having like a detective mindset. And so I thought
you've been an amazing FBI agent. I mean, I'm glad that you chose a different path because I don't think we would have known each other if you were in the FBI. I mean, I hope not, because that probably means I did something wrong, but you would have been amazing.
so funny because in high school and college, I stayed on the straight and narrow in terms of I never explored, drugs or marijuana or anything because I was convinced that if I had to sit down for a lie detector test, as a part of the FBI Academy or in order to get in, I couldn't lie. And so I had to make sure I could say honestly that I had not used drugs, right? So I always joke that it was actually the fear of a lie detector test that kept me from exploring some of that stuff earlier in my life.
That's hilarious. Okay. So your dreams of being an FBI agent were at some point set aside. You go and get your advanced degree in counseling. So what was your dream at that point?
I wanted to get my PhD though, honestly. I was interested in paranormal psychology, and Duke University at the time really only had the good paranormal psychology program.
But what does that mean?
So it means that you study the things that people have gifts for that are not always accepted. For example, if people are telepathic, or if people have like a very intuitive sense about things, or it's like the study of the abnormal of psychology. So now it's become really popularized on television where there's, ghost hunting or, things like that. But at the time, it really wasn't all that popular and it wasn't very scientifically studied. And so I decided that it was too sort of out there for me as a career track, even though I had a lot of interest in it from an intellectually, curious perspective. But yeah, so I decided, well, since I had to put myself through school, I had worked full time during college and I couldn't afford to go directly into my own PhD program. I wasn't sure then if I wanted to do adult psychology or child psychology. So I thought I'll just go out to the university where my mom is a professor at Winona State University in Minnesota, which is just about 2 hours south of the Twin Cities. And I'll get a free master's because children of professors could get, free education at the university. And I decided I'm going to figure it out. I'll go there, get a free master's, which you have to get along the way anyways. And I'll figure out if I want to do adult psychology or child psychology for a PhD perspective. And then after I graduated with my master's in counseling, I just was feeling done with school. I'm sure you can identify. It's like at some point you just want to start working.
Yeah.
Making money and sort of get out of the school track. And I think that is probably one of my biggest regrets in life from a leadership perspective is that I've always wanted to have my doctorate, even to this day, and I never went back. And so I always ask myself, is it something you still ever want to do in your life, or has it really, it's like no longer relevant because everything that you could do with a doctorate, you're currently doing now. And so is the doctorate really only for your ego?
Right.
Or is the doctorate really because it's a part of your life journey to get one? So, even as an adult now, I still ask myself that question from time to time. So yeah.
Life is long.
Yep.
I do think it's really interesting though, because when I think about our relationship and the relationship that you have with our leadership group and the services you provide, isn't it interesting how, you could have not predicted at the time when you were getting, your master's in psychology from Winona State, how that was going to serve you. You probably had a very different expectation of what your career was going to look like. But at the same time, I think you probably use that education every day in your leadership work that you do with your clients.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is the interesting thing about life's career journey. When you were sharing your story, you said the same thing. It's like you didn't start your career thinking I'm going to become an expert in insurance, It's like I thought I was going to be a therapist, and I was for a few years here in Tucson. There's a treatment center, inpatient treatment center called Sierra Tucson. And I started off working there because they had an integrative treatment program, which was really important for me, like combining the spiritual and not just like the traditional addiction program, but having an integrated mindset. So in any event, at the time, Sierra Tucson was number one in the country, well, almost the world. I think they were in the top 3. And that's where I want to go. That's where I want to be. I'm going to work at this place. And so I graduated with my master's. My grandparents had retired here. I had spent some summers here, growing up. So I was familiar with Tucson. Perfect. I'll go in, I'll live with them. I'll help them out, and then I'll apply to this program. And sure enough, it was the only place I applied, and I ended up getting in as a therapist. And I worked there for a couple years. And then I decided that I was working harder than my patients towards their own recovery.
Yeah.
And I wanted to work with the staff instead. And the management at the time, saw that I was naturally like moving into more management roles. I had some management experience, and I think it was just coming out naturally. So I ended up switching into management only a couple years after being a therapist. And sure enough, everything that we do as a leader to coach and mentor and active listening, self-empowerment, group facilitation, like helping people figure things out. Like it was all those skills that you learn as a therapist were playing out as a leader of a team, or supervising staff. And so I think it ended up being a really beautiful marriage, which, through the course of my growth in the executive area of management, launched me to become a coach. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really beautiful marriage of the interpersonal side, working with people, right? Like people are the biggest asset of any organization, and we get things done through people. And so those people tools, as you know, which are so important for me when I'm teaching, leadership training, I just feel that it really was grounded in a lot of the therapeutic modalities and work and learning and experience that I had.
I don't remember which book it was in. I was reading the other day, just kind of rereading two books, Fierce Conversations and also Radical Candor, which I know you're familiar with both. It was talking about how important it is as people leaders, right? This idea that you can kind of keep all of your team members at arm's distance and not have, an authentic relationship with them, and say, okay, well, when I'm a people leader, and so I've got to have these really firm boundaries and not be in relationship with my team, right? That can be a detractor from your effectiveness as a leader, and to not be afraid of having real, genuine relationships, and not in the clinical way, but I think she said, people who say, well, I don't want to be my team's counselor. Well, of course, not in a clinical way, right. But in a more broader, way. If you aren't up for that, leadership might not be the right path for you, because your teams are going to need you at a really human level, right? Yeah. Not just to direct their day-to-day tasks.
Yep. I really like the work that John Maxwell has regarding the 5 levels of leadership, because it really talks about when you get to be a leader the first time, you think, oh, I have a title now. I have power. I have like people will listen to me. Right. And then as you go up that pyramid of levels of leadership, you get to the top where you really realize that at the highest level of leadership, you are making things happen for other people, right? Like you are leaving a greater impact around those people who are underneath you and in your circle, and your influence expands, where it's about helping others achieve their goals. And it's less about like you personally thinking that you have power or a title or authority,
Right. Well, talk a little bit about the importance of unofficial leadership without the title, right? That leadership is more than a title.
Yes. And I really believe that when we were crafting a program and stuff, for me, the thing that I really want to get across to everyone that I work with personally is that you lead where you are in an organization, and you do not lead from a place of title or power. So how you show up in the workplace, how you show up to your peers, how you show up to those within your network, your customers, right? Your vendors, whoever, the way that you show up in the world as a human being of character, that is leadership. And it comes from a place of empowerment. And so when we go into organizations and we start working with companies, a lot of middle leaders are looking up at the senior team going, they need to tell me what to do. They're the ones that are making the decisions. Woe is me. I have no power or ability to influence the dynamic around me. And that's the very first thing we hit home. It's like, no, you have the ability to create the culture you want. You have the ability to influence this company and make this company's purpose and goals, get fulfilled. Wherever you are in the organization, you have the ability to influence, and you have to have to have that personal self-empowerment. And so for me personally, that goes back again to that inner people work, that one-to-one coaching or that one-to-one therapeutic journey of who am I in the world and how do I want to be in the world and what is my purpose for being in the world and how am I going to make the choices in my life to live my purpose. I just think that's really an important aspect of leadership is that it is not a title.
Mm-hmm. It's a two-way street, right? The call to action for all employees to step forward, make sure their voice is heard. Organizationally, how do we as businesses create an environment where people do feel empowered, right? Yeah. Without the title to take action on that advice.
And that's why I think that having a culture of coaching, it's obviously what we teach, but having a culture of coaching is really important because it's not about my relationship with my direct supervisor. That's not where the power lies in an organization. The power lies where employee to employee, cross-functionally, regardless of any sort of artificial hierarchy, are actually all coming together to help each other be the best that they can be. And when everyone in the organization is understanding that they have responsibility to take action to help someone when they're in a blind spot, give feedback when someone is stuck, not hold back because it's more comfortable to be silent, right? It's more comfortable to allow someone to have, behaviors that might not be the best for the team, but you don't want to say anything because you don't want that person to be upset or not like you. All of that politicking that happens in a lot of organizations when companies around their core values have the belief that we are all having a responsibility to help each other be the best that they can be. And sometimes that means getting uncomfortable for the sake of the individual and for the sake of the company culture and for the sake of the results of the organization. It can be so, so powerful.
I was having a conversation with women outside of our organization as a part of a business journal event. And we were talking about healthy conflict and how do you create a culture where people will speak up when somebody's acting in their blind spot and framing it in a way that is helpful for the team, helpful for that individual, right? And one of the questions came up about sometimes isn't it better to wait? And sometimes the answer is yes. But what we talked about was yes. And make sure before you do that you're really being honest with yourself about why are you waiting, right? Mm-hmm. And really being clear. Are you avoiding the uncomfortable conversation for yourself?
Yes.
Or are you motivated by a more positive outcome for the individual? And I would say the majority of the time we are avoiding the uncomfortable conversations for ourselves.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, that's why I love the Radical Candor book that you mentioned earlier, because I think that when we are in that quadrant of ruinous empathy, and for those who aren't familiar with that, it's like when you care about somebody, you care about the relationship, but you stay silent, you hold back. It's called ruinous empathy, meaning you're not giving this person the feedback that could be the thing that they need to help them become greater, because it's easier for you to stay silent because you do care about the relationship. You don't want that person to have hurt feelings or that person to feel, uncomfortable. And so you do hold back because it's easier for you. And that's the ruinous empathy piece, which I think as human beings it's normal for us to not want to get uncomfortable sometimes or have to deal with defensiveness or have to deal with someone's pushback against us, But if we trust the relationship is there and we trust that person is going to know that we're doing it for the best reasons, not from a place of manipulation, but from a place of really believing in that person and caring about that person. I think leaders will often talk in these different interviews about how the manager they had that gave them the most critical, direct, real life feedback is the person that they remember their whole career because it changed the trajectory of that person's leadership journey.
Absolutely. Okay, well, question for you. Do you have anybody in your life that comes to mind when you think about who may have changed the trajectory of your career?
Oh, that's a great question. There's many individuals, I think, who, when I was, at Sierra Tucson, I was there 13 years and was growing in management each time. They really believed in my potential. It wasn't that I was currently demonstrating the level of competence as a leader or the competence in management or anything like that. But they saw potential in me, and they gave me opportunities to stretch out of a comfort zone for it to be okay to not do a great job at it, or allowed me to sit in on meetings, to be a fly on the wall, to just hear what it sounded like, for a corporate conversation to occur, or put me in and, took the time to recommend that I do a corporate executive leadership training program or something. It's like the people who saw the potential. And one of the individuals, obviously, you mentioned him earlier, David Chavez. When I met him, I was the executive director for a company at the time out in California, and they had 6 clinics around the country. And I was learning new material. And every time I learned new material, I would go and teach all of the executives who were leading the 6 clinics at the time around the country. I was always teaching down. And then when I left that organization, he said, I can see you as a trainer. I can see you as a teacher. And I was scared to do public speaking. I mean, I was terrified. I can put a good smile on my face and I can suck it up and I can pretend like I'm comfortable. But on the inside, it's not comfortable for me. It took many, many years of doing it to even begin to have some level of comfort now, But the potential was there. And so even though I didn't see that I could do it, someone said, I do believe it's there. You just need to try, and it's okay if you don't do it well, and allowed me the opportunity to work with clients and learn on the job. I didn't have to come in to become a coach with all this expertise. I could learn and grow along the journey, just like I was learning and growing from our clients, right? It was a symbiotic growth.
When did you make the leap from, being on the corporate side to then joining Assured Strategies as a full-time coach?
Well, I decided that I, was sort of becoming unhappy with the idea of working towards a larger organization's gains or benefits and not being able to sort of work towards my own vision of what I wanted in my life. And I have this, belief for myself. I have my own purpose. It's just like, I want to help people in the world be able to fulfill what they feel that their purpose is. And so being a coach provided a platform for me to be able to work outside of the mental health industry and really bring some of these self-awareness tools and conversations and executive coaching skills and stuff into the everyday leaders world, because it's common in that industry to understand some of these things, but it's not always common in other business arenas, right? It's just not the language that other companies kind of use. And so for me, it was allowing me the opportunity to help bring some basic stuff, which could have a really large impact potentially on people's self-discovery and their own journeys in life and their own ideas of going where they want to go in their world, into the larger business arena. And so I had a transition. I mean, David sometimes says you build the runway while you take it, while the plane's taking off. And I had to still work part-time as an executive for a company in order to pay the bills, right? While I was growing as a coach and getting training and getting exposed to clients and developing programs and starting to do that kind of stuff. It definitely took a year or so during this transition to launch. But now, I'm a full-time coach. I'm contracted to Assured Strategy, of course. And so, Lassiter Incorporated is my own personal company, but I work as a coach full-time with Assured Strategy and do the leadership training and the executive coaching. And it's really a passion of mine. It provides an opportunity to help people become who they're meant to be in the world, to be a part of that journey. It's quite a gift. It's quite humbling.
We're glad we have benefited from that gift for sure. You mentioned shared language and you're right. Like the world you came from, there's a probably, very high level of emotional intelligence, shared language around problem solving and, issue processing in its own way. Right. But people come from all sorts of different backgrounds and have, very different feelings around conflict and relationship and how to build trust and all of those things. But what I really feel like we have gained at the Partners Group is that common tool set and even using common language around when you're going to tackle a hard problem. When you use tools that are known to the entire group, it takes the emotional reaction out of it and just level sets, right? It's like it actually reframes and kind of puts everybody's attention where it needs to be, which is on the issue, and puts everybody kind of on an equal playing field in terms of what we're about ready to go through, right? And so that common language is really, really valuable.
Yeah. And I think that is a really important piece, which we sort of touched upon it earlier in our conversation, which is that we have to destigmatize giving the feedback, right? It has to be a part of the culture that it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations for the sake of the goals and the sake of that person and the sake of the relationship on the team and for the sake of, being authentic and not wasting so much time in the politics of things around an organization. And so when you normalize the language around things, like I could say, hey, Sarah, I need to sit down with you and have a really candid conversation. It might be uncomfortable, and I'm hoping you'll allow me to clean it up afterwards. Meaning I don't deliver it in the perfect way and you get defensive or don't, have pushback, or we have sort of that tension of the conversation. You're giving me grace to clean it up. And you know that I'm doing it because we need to have an uncomfortable conversation, and I'm not doing it to judge you. So just even a few sentences here and there where you know what the language means, it's very powerful in conversation within an organization.
Well, and what I have found is it is powerful and it's not intuitive, but it's these conversations that actually lead to deeper, richer relationships. So what you think that you're going to get by avoiding hard conversation is actually the opposite. And so the better that we have gotten organizationally and as a leadership team, I think the more connected we feel and the deeper level of trust. And then it's the symbiotic relationship between trust, conflict, results, accountability, all of the things, right, that make an organization great. And so you just wouldn't get there without attention, focus, training, and a commitment to being curious about these leadership concepts, right? So it's been a great journey for us, and I think is worth the investment of any organization that is looking to level up. And good for, let's say, we've got listeners who work in a role or in a company where there's not that level of investment currently for many reasons. What advice would you give to individuals to help themselves develop these qualities when they might not have an access to a Keyne in their life or, this level of coaching in their organization?
You touched upon, it was an awesome question. You touched upon a word there, curious. And I know that's one of your guys' core values, be curious. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, curiosity is what drives the ability to fully live the best life that you can. And so it doesn't take a company to provide that for you, the individual. If the individual has within their heart a curiosity of self-exploration and self-growth and, reading books or doing free webinars, like today we had a free webinar that I did. There's resources out there. There's resources in other arenas besides a company, right? At different types of groups that someone belongs to. I think there's resources for that mentorship and that learning to come, even if an organization doesn't provide it directly from a cultural perspective of the company. And I think at some point, the idea of being curious, it's like you have to be willing to push yourself out of the comfort zone, and you do that through curiosity. And I think that's a major part of what we do in coaching, right? It's like we're asking curiosity questions. I wonder why that person did what they did. I wonder why that person thought what they thought. I wonder why that dynamic happened the way that it did. And when you go from a place of curiosity, not from a place of judgment, it allows for that growth and that discovery. And one of the things growing up that we had in my spiritual upbringing was this concept of CCJ. It's called criticism, condemnation, and judgment. When you approach the world and your interactions with people from a place of CCJ, it really shuts down that growth, right? But when you come at it from a place of curiosity, it expands that growth potential of being open to something that you might not know. Mm-hmm. And I think your core value, right, at the Partners Group of being curious is just such an important part of anyone's leadership journey or really life journey. And I don't think that's dependent upon a company providing. I think that's really going to be something from within.
When we're tired or stressed or, maybe we didn't get a good night's sleep, right? When we're not acting in our best selves, we might be more reactive. And I love that question. Like, am I reacting just impulsively from a position of judgment? Just checking in with myself, because I tend not to do that when I've had a great night's sleep and when I'm not back to back in meetings, right? But I'm learning things even in this interview with you, Keyne. I'm taking notes, and I just appreciate every conversation I have with you. It's like, okay, well, that's a really good reminder to myself. Like, pause between the stimulus and your reaction, give space to really, so that you can have room for that curiosity.
Yeah, I think growing up, my mom and my dad used to always say to me, when you're in front of a pyramid, you only see the side that you're on because your perspective is so close to that wall.
Yeah.
And it's not until you go up the pyramid and get to the top of the pyramid that you can actually look down and see that there were many sides of the pyramid and have that perspective. And so I think for me, curiosity allows us to suspend the judgment long enough to consider that maybe my point of view or the way I see the world or my experience of the conversation or my, frustration or anger, resentment, my reactivity, maybe there's something else. And as long as I can at least hold a bit of the curiosity there of, I wonder what was going on for them or I wonder what this is really about for me, why I reacted the way that I did. It's just holding on to curiosity allows us to get up higher to see a different perspective than when we are right in front and standing right in front of our side of the pyramid, our opinion, our self-belief or world belief, our paradigm,
I love that. You talked a little bit about purpose, and that word stands out to me because of a conversation I actually had last week. I was talking with a peer and we were on a hike and we were talking about happiness and, just big life stuff. And I used the word passion. And she said, I've been doing a lot of, research on happiness, what she's been learning. And this was so interesting to me that purpose will have more impact on happiness than passion. That passion comes and goes and wanes with seasons of life. And you might be passionate about something for a year or two, and then that shifts. If you lead a life chasing passion, your happiness might not be as high as if you lead a life pursuing your purpose. So you've said purpose a couple times, and I just would love to hear from you. What do you mean by that?
Oh man, I've never thought about the idea of passion, what the difference is between passion and purpose. And I really love the conversation that you're sharing there, because I do think you have different interests at different time that could be your passion of the day, right? Or like passion of the decade or whatever. But if all of your passions are aligning themselves towards your ability to live your purpose, then you're able to make decisions in your life that continue you down the journey of what it is that you feel you're on this earth to do. And so it's kind of like the purpose for me personally is sort of my North Star. I always think to myself, if I'm feeling disengaged from my role or I'm feeling disengaged from my environment, what is it about that's holding me back from feeling like I'm here doing what it is that is my best gift in the world to do? Because sometimes in our lives, we have to do things that maybe aren't the best fit for our, ultimate gift in the world. And we learn around that, and that's fine. And that's a part of all of our career journeys, But if we continue to ask ourselves that question, I think it allows us to say, don't become complacent with what you know, even though it's uncomfortable, right? Like, don't become complacent just because it's safe, but it doesn't feel good. Be willing to go unsafe, because you know that at the end of the day is going to feel better. And there's fear in the change, right? But if you're really trying to live a purpose, you have to change, because the status quo isn't fulfilling your ambition in life to be the fullness of what you're meant to be. So I love that conversation that you had, because in your story, looking, listening to you, you talked about, you wanted to get into, different aspects of being in the media. And then that led to something else. And like you had passion of those different topics at different times of your career journey. But the North Star purpose for you, my guess, I don't know, you can maybe answer that, was probably the lens in which you kept making decisions for or through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. Well, you've got a big work life and you also have a big home life. So I'm always loving to learn from others about how you practice self-care, work-life balance. How do you keep everything straight and practice what you preach?
Well, it is hard. I am the very first to admit that it is a lot easier to teach a leadership training class and the topics of self-care and work-life integration. We don't believe in the word balance because at some point in our careers, you have to integrate the personal with the business. So there isn't like a balance per se. There's an integration. But regardless, it is much easier to talk about it than it is to actually do it. So I am by no means at times doing it well. But having said that, I have a husband who is very supportive of my travel and my entrepreneur energy and my desire to be a part of a team that is growing something that I'm like personally invested in and personally contributing towards. So I think that you need to have support behind the scenes in whatever that looks like for an individual, right? Whatever friends or family support someone has, I think that really does need to be there. When my kids were younger, it was a lot harder and there was a lot more guilt in leaving. But I had a mother who had retired, and for heaven's sake, she's a professor of early childhood education, best grandma and caretaker of my kids that I could have. So I was very, very blessed to be able to leave, even though I felt bad or guilty about it, knowing that they were being taken care of by someone who I, explicitly trusted and had their best interests at heart. And so I just really think that home life for me personally as a coach has been super important.
Yeah.
And then I think also in terms of self-care, there's been times in my life when I have been, much more practicing my spiritual practices than others. And I think I've gone through a period in my life where I got away from that for a while. And I'm at a period now in my life where I'm getting back to, wanting to do more of that personal work, some self-reflection. I turned 49 just this past week. And so I think getting ready to enter my 50s, I think is a time for any leader to have some self-reflection, really thinking about what is it that I want to do with this next part of my life and how do I want to move into a role or move into experiences that are going to help me manifest more of who I'm meant to be. And I think along that journey, Sarah, we have to at times surrender the attachment to a title or surrender the attachment to tasks or the attachment to our professional identity and ask hard questions, which is, are we doing what we're really meant to be doing, or has it just become status quo? Transitions like that for us in our career are sometimes really challenging. But at the end of the day, I think, when we talk about work-life integration, if we are truly doing what is our purpose in life to do, then it's much more fulfilling. Therefore, you feel better in it. It's like you don't mind the hard work, the long hours, the learning, the growth, like the uncomfortable stretching into different things. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean you don't go through grief or loss as you change different things in your life. But I think that self-care, like for me, it's a lot more than just eating well, exercising, sleeping well, like all the normal stuff we talk about. I think for me, self-care is really about, am I needing to readjust what's going on in my world in order to become more aligned with who I am in this world and who I want to be in this world? So for me, I think it's a deeper concept of that whole idea of, self-care and integration of work life and personal life.
I'm with you. I'm 49. I turned 50 in May and I feel it, this shift. And I love what you said about it's bigger than checking the boxes, right, of exercise, sleep, nutrition, right? But going back to our conversation about purpose, journaling, it's really exploring for me, what does that look like? At this midpoint, if I'm lucky enough to live to 100, right? what does that look like for the next 50 years? That's not something that you can just answer on a long walk, right? It takes time, takes focus. It takes a lot of energy to discover that about yourself, but so worth it.
Yeah. And it gets back to what you started off talking about earlier, which is the curiosity again, right? Like that's why, I love that the Partners Group has the core value of be curious, because if we stay in life from a place of curiosity, it just leads you to that next great thing or that next great discovery or insight or opportunity. It's like you're open to the world around you. So yeah, I just think it's such an important piece as a leader of any kind, right? Male, female, young, old, titled or not titled, whoever, right? Like if we're going to show up in the world from a place of claiming our identity of who we are and what we want to be in the world, I just think we have to be curious.
Absolutely. You teach a lot of leadership concepts, and we have been the beneficiary of many of those topics. But I am curious, speaking of curiosity, what is your favorite leadership concept to teach?
I think the one that I really found a lot of value with coming out of the counseling world is the Cartman drama triangle.
Oh, yeah.
That drama triangle, it's used in different ways. It's a public source. I mean, it's out there everywhere. Many leadership books will just retitle it different things or talk about it in different ways. But basically, it's the idea that you have the victim, which says, woe is me. It's not fair. It's not right. It shouldn't have happened to me. They have to point the finger at the persecutor, either a thing or a person or an event or something. Like it could be, God or politics or the environment or a person or a company. It doesn't matter, right? But they have to point the finger. A victim points the finger outside and says, that's not right. That's not fair. And that's the reason why, right? It's over here attacking me. It's coming at me. And then they have to go and run to a rescuer to say, oh, woe is me. Don't you agree that I shouldn't, have to deal with this? Or, like they want someone to commiserate with them and to get all sucked into the drama of their victim mentality, right? So that's the Cartman drama triangle. And I think that when we go through, coaching or leadership training or, basically life, we fall into this very easily, and we can be in different roles at different times. Even in the same day or even in the same meeting, right? Or even in the same conversation, I could be flipping around if I'm in this area. And so when we go through life from that victim mentality, it's a disempowerment energy. It doesn't allow us to really say, hey, I created this reality. I might not like what's happening to me, but I have a choice in how I respond. For example, in 2020, I was diagnosed with 3 different kinds of cancers in 1 month, right? So it's like, I didn't ask for this. It sucks. But I can't control what's happening medically. I have to give myself over to the medical, professionals and go through this journey. But I can respond for myself. Like I can control my reaction. I can control that I don't, just sit and cry all the time, or that I still show up and teach classes, or that I'm going to, get that wig on and go and like pretend everything's fine and like give the best of myself that day. It's like I can only control myself. I can't control always what's going on around me. And so when we go at life, I think as much as possible, because obviously we all have good days, bad days. No one ever does this quote unquote perfectly ever. We're all human here. If we try as much as possible to go from a place of empowerment, meaning like I'm creating this reality around me, I can try to see life as a challenge and not that it's persecuting me, or see that this feedback I'm getting is to help me get better. It's not because that person is, judging me, and I can help. Like I can go to someone and they can hold my hand, during that time. I think when we can try to live life from a place of empowerment versus a place of victimization, it allows for us to live a more purpose-driven life.
I also love that framework. How do you disrupt the drama triangle, right? I mean, even if you're in it, right? Is it awareness? Is it self-awareness? And what would be your advice to, if you see a conversation going, you're like, oh, I see victim, villain, hero, right? How do you move that to adult conversation?
Really, it's just holding space, I think, Sarah, lacking the judgment, suspending your judgment about it, and then helping that person move out of it through curiosity questions without becoming the rescuer.
That's really good. Okay, my last question. And I think I know the answer to this, but this is a question I ask all of my podcast guests. And that is to pick one of our core values and which one of these resonates with you most. And we've been talking about one of them throughout most of this podcast, but I'm going to read our 5 just to be sure we didn't miss one. Play well with others, own it, be a champion, have fun and live well. And last but not least, be curious.
Well, obviously, if I had to pick out of the 5, I think you know my answer by now. But let me end by saying sort of how I resonate with the others, maybe a little bit from our conversation.
I'd love that.
You've got play well with others. And for me, I think that when we all have grace for each other's humanity and we all are willing to get uncomfortable for the sake of the team's growth or the person's growth or the company's growth, right? Like we're willing to put ourselves out there, but from a place of care, not from a place of judgment. I think that that's really like a really high demonstration of play well with others. I think the be a champion for me is also another really important one. And that gets back to our conversation regarding purpose. If us as an individual are living a purpose-driven life, then we are the champion for whatever that looks like to those around us. And like you said, those passions at times in our life can ebb and flow or change. But if we are a champion of whatever it is that we are about, that North Star concept we feel like our life is about, I think that's being a champion for that thing. Owning it. I mean, that gets back to the self-awareness piece. It's like we have to be willing to get off our face of the pyramid and raise our consciousness above and be willing to say that if I'm really going to hold space for the potential conversation to not just be about me, I have to own the fact that it's not always going to be my paradigm, my perspective. I have to own my biases. I have to own my belief system. I have to own my unconscious like we talk about unconscious biases in the workplace. And stuff. Like I have to own it, and it doesn't always feel good there either. Right. I think have fun, live well. I love that you asked about that piece indirectly through, like as a busy person, how do you keep it all together? I think you have to find the times to be able to have joy, and whatever that looks like for you, you find the joy if you're living your purpose. Even if the experience is challenging, like right now I'm in a transition piece for myself in my life. And it's like, I have to sit back and I might sit outside and have a cup of coffee and look at the mountains, here where I live and contemplate life. I mean, it's not necessarily fun, but it is finding the joy of that moment because the pain actually creates the reward, so to speak. So I think that having fun and living well doesn't always look like playtime,
Yeah, absolutely. This has been an honor for me. Thank you again for taking the time. I've learned a lot about you. Yay. And we've had fun, and thank you for continuing to explore these leadership concepts with me and sharing them with our listeners. You're a joy to work with, and I just really appreciate your friendship.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it too.
This episode of At the Core with Sarah Friend was brought to you by The Partners Group. Visit us at thepartnersgroup.com or find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback. At the Core with Sarah Friend is produced by the Partners Group marketing team. Our content writer and editor is Carrie Conroy. Taylor Kapik handles audio engineering and graphics. Kyle Lusk is our podcast administrator, and Alyssa Mueller is in charge of project management and guest outreach. Courtney Atami oversees our podcast production. Find all of our episodes at thepartnersgroup.com, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Advisory services offered through TPG Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor and wholly owned subsidiary of the Partners Group, LLC.